Daddy, what do you think if I go with this background?
Hold on, I can't see you just yet. I'm just setting up Facebook. I think we're live on Facebook. Oh, I can't see you.
What's so funny?
I just saw his background.
I've just discovered the internet, Daniel.
I told you. David, this is a computer.
It's amazing what happens in lockdown, the things you discover. Backgrounds. Look, I can be at the Western Wall 1 minute, at the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Farbrengen the next minute, and then Lahavdil Elef Avdolis back at East Melbourne Shul. Well, not Lahavdil Elef Avdolis. I was going to do something else there, the MCG, but anyway.
Yeah, please treat your shul with respect.
Yeah, Rochel's right here. She's raring to go.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. I think we're going to begin. And tonight, as advertised, David and I felt a little bit inept just on our own. And so we've invited the power behind our life and our homes and our shuls, which is our Rebbitzins. And Rochel's trying to get in. Yeah, I think take away your background, David.
Yeah, we're gonna do that. Hang on. I'm still discovering parts of the internet. Let's go up, and should we just do blurred or?
That's
good.
Fine.
It's fine. Baruch Hashem. You're standing up in your shiur.
This is a standing desk.
After sitting all day and eating all day, yeah, time to stand up.
Amazing. Very good. So a warm welcome to everybody that's joined us tonight.
What's that one?
Say hi.
Hi, everybody. Wow. I feel like I'm like, you don't have to say hi anymore. Don't see anybody.
These are other human beings, Sarah. Say welcome to other
welcome to this planet Earth.
Is it though? I'm not so sure these days.
So as advertised tonight, we're going to be chatting about the Parsha as we did last week. And of course, it might land up chatting about all sorts of things. Who knows where the conversation might go. And thank you to Rachel last week who joined us and gave us this idea to do it as a joint rabbis and rebbitzins activity.
Thanks, Rachel.
Sure. Anytime. Always happy to chat.
So I think we're going to get stuck right into it. David, I don't know if you want to kick us off tonight, or do you want me to do the honors? Any thoughts that you had? Obviously, just say the Parsha is Parsha's Kiteitzei, that we would be reading in shul if we were in shul the Shabbat, but we'll have to be reading it at home, unless a real miracle happens overnight. But Mashiach, exactly.
Time to that.
I know. Where's our wine glasses? Should make it a Farbrengen.
So, David, did you want to start, a Rachel or Sarah or me? Whoever wants to go first. This is going
to be very awkward. It's going to be like
it's going to be ad hoc. We're all comfortable. We're all,
Exactly.
All right, Rachel, go.
This week's Parsha Kiteitzei. What I know about it is that I believe it contains the most mitzvot from any Parsha in the Torah. 74 mitzvot contained within these verses. Compare that to the book of Bereshit, the first of the 5, which only contains, I believe, 3 mitzvot. And here we've got 74. So it's jam-packed, lots of different ones. They range from a whole bunch of topics, some more personal, some more public, some between man and God, some between man and his fellow. We'll hear more about them from the rest of the group.
Beautiful. Yeah, so lots of mitzvot and lots of tractates of Talmud based on a number of, one line in this Parsha is almost like a whole tractate in the Talmud. So it's quite a powerful Parsha. Well, I guess I'll kick us off then. If
there you go.
I'll get the ball rolling now that we know how many parshas, how many mitzvot there are. But I wanted to, one of the big areas that I wanted to focus on tonight in the Parsha is a topic which I've really enjoyed learning about and taking it further at times, and that is the mitzvah of Hashavat Aveda, returning a lost object, which is found in our. Oh, there's an echo. Where's that coming from?
Do you want me to move? I'll mute for a second.
It just, I don't know what happened. It just went. I was hearing myself talk. Now I know what you all go through. So it speaks about this very special mitzvah called Hashavat Aveda, which talks about, obviously, if you're walking in the street and you come across an object that appears to be lost, you have a special mitzvah to return the lost object. And you cannot just stand by idly and say, not my problem. Somebody else, obviously, you could easily walk on by, but if you see the object, then the Torah says you have a mitzvah to go ahead and return. And I think there's two really beautiful insights that I'd like to share on this particular topic. And then, of course, feel free to jump in, anyone. But the first thing is there's an interesting thing. If you go look for a lost object, what are the requirements? And again, there are lots of different halakhic rulings around it, but ultimately, the only way that you can have the obligation to return it is if there's something recognizable on that object called a siman, a sign. Certain things in this world don't have a siman because anyone can have them, like money. If I have a $20 note and I drop it and someone else picks it up, or I pay for it in the shop, no longer is it recognizable that it's mine anymore. And so therefore, you don't have to return it. But the ultimate question is, why don't you have to return it? It's still my money, isn't it? And the Chachamim and the rabbis explain to us that it's almost like going into our psyche, but the minute there's no way that the person who finds it could identify the owner, we assume that the owner is being mayayish, he's actually given up hope on ever finding that object. So let's say I lost, as I said, a $20 note, and I walked on, I dropped it in the city. So I'm not picking on East Melbourne or anything, but I dropped my $20 note
in the New York City,
and I came back to South Caulfield, and I'm like, oh, I lost my $20 note. In my mind, I've given up. There's no ways I'm going to get that $20 note back. And so therefore, if David finds the $20 note walking through the streets of East Melbourne, he doesn't have to feel guilty and think maybe this is Daniel's money. He can keep it, Baruch Hashem. Look, if you knew it was mine, you give it back. And so the question is, metaphorically, what is the Torah teaching us? There's going to be times in life where we feel lost, where we feel, the world's closing in on us, things are looking bleak, and perhaps there are many who might feel like that right now. And the answer the Torah is telling us that if you don't lose hope, as long as you keep hope alive, something will be returned. The minute you give up hope and belief, that's when all else unfortunately can become ownerless. And we know Viktor Frankl was a big, he studied that, and he saw that in the Holocaust. Those who held on to some hope that it would be the ability to one day get out of that mess and out of the tragedies of the Holocaust, somehow it helped them survive. Not that that was a guarantee, of course. And I think if we keep hope alive, if we believe that there's a better future ahead, then I think there's going to be someone who can hopefully help us return it, whether it be ourselves. And I'm not going to continue now. Maybe later I'll come back to it, but there's another beautiful insight about how the Torah describes the different objects that you might find. But to kick us off is we need to have hope. I think at this time more than ever, as I said, don't lose hope, because if you got hope, then things will not be lost, please God. So I'll pass it back to you guys. Just unmute yourselves, David.
I muted myself so we shouldn't echo, and then I forgot to unmute. Shkoyach for those words. And I wanted to just add one small point and on the discussion about noticing lost objects and so on, which is a very interesting topic. Lots of lessons about just human psychology and the ability to nurture things that have been lost. There's famous stories in the Gemara about people who found objects, didn't just put them in their homes, but actually helped develop them. And when a person lost an individual animal, for example, and he came back several years later and he found a whole thriving farm to be returned. So sometimes you take something that you find along the way by accident and you develop it and you nurture it and you turn it into something more, which is a great metaphor on life. But the one thing that really caught my attention throughout this parasha, not just in finding a lost object, but throughout the parasha, is this idea of noticing things. And what a skill in life it is to notice things. I've noticed that a lot of people throughout this.
Sorry, David, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's your sound's starting to like. I don't know if it's our computer, but do people hear that a bit of crackling there as well? Or? Yeah.
I will see.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, such a pure voice now.
Thanks for that.
That could be calling the Melbourne Cup from this microphone. Okay. I hope that's better.
Yeah.
Much better. Yeah. Much better.
Baruch Hashem. Okay. So the ideas that you brought up about noticing something on the way, it's reminded me of something I've been seeing over the last few weeks. A lot of people during the lockdown period have been going around on very basic rudimentary activities, walking, moving around their neighborhood, but making a specific point to notice things. And the idea of overlooking versus noticing is a very powerful message that doesn't just appear about finding a lost object and returning it, but it also appears when, for example, it says you notice your friend's animal is moving through the city or through the town with a load, but the load is loose or it's fallen off. And this idea of noticing something and being not completely self-absorbed to the point that you're curious about the world around you and you're noticing things is one of the key talents to making a difference in this world. And I noticed, I once had a discussion with Rachel who stopped. What did you stop on the road for?
My kids are so embarrassed of me because I stop for everything and anyone. If I see little kids that look unattended or anything, I saw a lost dog, I pull over and my kids are like, Mom, just ignore, just move on, don't embarrass us. But no, I stop and I check, and does this child belong to anybody? And or is anyone looking for this dog? I'll look at the collar, I'll call the number, I get involved, and I tell my kids, no, it's important to get involved if you feel something needs fixing and you're available to help. Why not? Why should everyone just walk on by when there might be a problem? Sometimes there isn't a problem and I kind of just take a step back and I tell them, oh, sorry, I didn't see you there, I just saw the kid. Okay, all good, just checking that my work here is done before I move on. But yeah, it's important to notice, and we make the time for it and we look out for it. And people can be so grateful when there was something that needed fixing and I did stop. Well, how good is that? Not to my own horn.
Yeah, no, it is good.
It's an important thing to look at in life.
And you never know, you can make a difference. You know, there's two tricks. One is to notice, and the second is to do something about it, to have a little bit of self-belief and confidence. And you say, I noticed something is not quite right. There's a very famous story of a Rav who got a shayla. And the shayla was, instead of making my Pesach Seder with 4 cups of wine, can I do it with 4 cups of milk? And he thought about it. And instead he told one of his Hasidim to bring a donation of tzedakah, of charity, to this person who asked the question. And he said, I noticed in that question, not a halachic question, I noticed somebody that couldn't afford wine and instead was looking at the prospect, or potentially couldn't afford wine, and instead was looking at the prospect of using milk instead of wine at their Pesach Seder. And so I realized, and I noticed, and I was curious enough to notice that there was something not right with this picture and with this scene. And I think,
sorry to jump in there, the fact that he was ready to use milk showed that he didn't have meat for his Seder either, because how would you have a meal drinking milk and eating meat? So clearly he didn't have money for meat as well.
Beautiful.
Yeah, good pickup. So I think the art of noticing things that other people overlook is dotted throughout this parsha in probably about 7 or 8 of the mitzvahs. The idea of just being aware, curious, and noticing. And if there's one takeaway during this time, was we get the 2 hours of walking around. We can walk through Fitzroy Gardens and near the MCG. Is just notice some of the things that you wouldn't otherwise pay attention. I know it's a bit of a mindfulness fad, and so you notice some of these things. This is a real inherent idea in this week's parsha. And when the Lubavitcher Rebbe was once left a little duch, a little letter that somebody wanted to leave, and they slotted it into the door, and they hoped that the secretary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe would pick it up and give it to him. And what actually happened was the door opened and the secretary missed it, didn't notice it. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe later, when he was walking into his office, he saw it, and he was in his late 80s, and this person was watching from a distance. The Lubavitcher Rebbe bent over, picked it up, and took it and had a look and read it, and then was able to respond to whatever the message was. And the person wrote an apology letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying, I'm sorry I made you bend over. I'm sorry I inconvenienced you. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, he said, I meant it for your secretary. The Lubavitcher Rebbe answered and said, on the contrary, the whole point of being a Rebbe and being a leader is to notice what other people have overlooked and take action on it. So that's the big message from the mitzvah that you introduced and several of the other mitzvahs.
Beautiful. I mean, it's interesting because, you mentioned that story about the milk and the wine and so on. I remember when we got smicha, I remember that the Rosh Hashiva told us, the greatest skill of being a rabbi, and I guess a counselor, any human being, is listening and being observant of the question behind the question. Often people may be nervous to express a particular problem that they're going through in their life, so they have to disguise it in some other way to feel more comfortable or less ashamed, perhaps. And so you've got to listen to the call behind the call, if you like. And I think that's what it means to be shomer Shabbat, shomer mitzvot. It's not only to be so rigid on the mitzvot, but to be observant of how your impact is when you do the mitzvot. But Sarah, you were telling me earlier about the mitzvah of this ben soreh or moreh, this wayward son. I think we can probably talk about this for hours in education.
Yeah, definitely.
Not from anyone's personal experience.
No, definitely not. It's a hypothetical case. The Talmud says it never ever happened, but you would pointed out to me a very important educational message.
Well, it says that when it talks about that you need to listen to the voice of B'kol Aviv, and it says B'kol Imo. So it says, like the question is, why does it say B'kol twice, which means the voice? Why didn't it just say the voice of the mother and the father? So obviously, like this, it's saying that one of the things that the son was, not the best person, that he didn't listen to his parents' voice. But why specifically does it have to say voice twice? So I think one of the lessons is that when it's talking about the voice twice, it's talking about that there's a father's voice and a mother's voice, so they both have their own voices. And a lot of times what happens is, I guess I'm laughing because we're guilty, but when you're telling your kids something, or you're telling them what to do, or they're not listening, and the father has one opinion, the mother has another opinion, and then they start arguing, and then unfortunately it becomes a big fight, and
the confusion for the child.
Yeah, and the kids gets confused, and it's not good. So that's my big thing always at home, that even if you might have different opinions, then at least in front of the kids, you should at least show that you could, sort of be on the same page and have a similar opinion, so that at least the kids come out with good messages and, realize that.
Right, because I think if your kids are hearing Kol Aviv and Kol Imo, like who's right, who do I follow, how do I navigate life with these, many different messages which are conflicting. And then it causes confusion. So I think the Torah was giving us a very powerful educational message about keeping consistent voices, that children have an easy, understandable pathway, how they should live, how they should follow, how they should. And of course, it doesn't mean, like Sarah said, it doesn't mean we can't argue, but it should be, we should come to a consensus, which is not always the easiest thing to do at times, but we do get to that point, and then give the child the way forward. So it's amazing how many the whole Torah is current and relevant. Might not be necessarily, the specific detail are relevant today, but the messages of those details are certainly current. So I think if we can try and have one voice when it comes to the chinuch of our children and our community, perhaps as well, it could be very helpful.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things it says about Shammai and Hillel, and Beis Shammai and Beit Hillel, the two famous protagonists in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, is that they debated and they argued, and then once the halacha was decided, they had no issues observing a halacha that went against their opinion and favored the opinion of their protagonist. They had no issue kind of presenting that to their family and their community and their people, even though it wasn't their view, it wasn't their opinion. But because they debated and they argued with kind of a sincerity and a real commitment to the truth, and they were able to concede when the decision went against them, and able to present the opposing view as if it was their own. So, that's a really high level, I guess. But you can do that in any relationship, really. It's actually one of the themes of being a team player, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because with Beis Hillel, sorry, Rachel, but just on that, I didn't want to let that point go, because with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, most of the halacha follows that of Beis Hillel. Right. Certain exceptions to that rule. And one of the questions is why. And the interesting thing is he always wanted to hear Beis Shammai's view first.
Yeah.
He says he would always say, Beis Shammai, tell me what you think. And then if he disagreed, he would do so, but he allowed the other person's view to really sink in and say, look, let me see this person's perspective, as opposed to just saying, I'll tell you what I think, you tell me what you think, I'm not going to actually really listen, and then I'll pretend that I'm listening to what you say, and then I'm still going to go with my view. But he was very considerate of another person's view, and I think you've got to be considerate, as Sarah is very considerate of my views all the time.
Definitely.
I'm not pointing any fingers, God forbid, but yeah, it's I guess it's related.
We could agree to disagree.
At times, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel.
No, all good, all good.
What are you going to say?
Point.
Yeah.
No, it's a sign of humility when you can have a respectful dialogue and actually hear the other person, and not just be thinking in your head, well, what am I going to answer to this, or what are my counterpoints, but really trying to see it from the other perspective.
And it's very awkward to be giving a shir with your wife standing next to you purely because purely because you preach all these great ideas and then they're like, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's like
We're in front of the community. Shh, don't tell the secrets.
I think the Sfas Emes famously said, if you really want to know who a true God-fearing person is, you should check with the spouse. They can tell you. Anyways, I'm good.
All good. All good.
No, but it's funny you mentioned that because every time I give a drosha and I come home for lunch, Sarah's like, who are you talking to over there? Like, are you actually listening to what you're saying? Are you actually believe what you're saying? So she keeps me in check and says, you got to practice what you preach. So 100%.
I was like, where's my diamonds? He keeps talking about the diamonds that the wife is supposed to get from the husband.
Yeah.
I'm like, thanks.
We will keep it real. Keep you grounded.
Very good.
So what other thoughts? Whose court is it in at the moment?
Okay. All right. So let's throw in one more from the beginning of the Parsha.
Yeah.
The very, very bizarre and unusual law that starts off the Parsha, which seems to go against everything that Judaism espouses, which is that when you go to war and there's a beautiful woman from amongst the enemy, you can take her as a captive, and it gives you a whole process of how to bring her into your home if you so desire. And the process is you have to wait for a period of time. She has to give her time to grieve for the loss of her family. She has to make herself unattractive. And then after that period of time, she can come into your home and become your spouse or part of your family, whatever it is. And it's quite an extraordinary and difficult. I know Rambam and Ramban debate this law of the Isha Yefat Torah. What a strange thing for the Torah to be preaching. I haven't answered the question. I've just raised the question.
I was thinking, you're going to raise this really important, controversial question. You're going to say, Rabbi Rabin, what do you have to say about it?
Let's hear your thoughts.
Well,
but I'm going to say, David, I'm going to respect my elders, and I'll give you an opportunity to. Although I probably have more gray in my beard than you do. But...
No, I do. Mine's behind.
So what? How do you understand that spiritually, metaphorically, emotionally?
I'll tell you how I took it, and then we'll see if Rochel thinks it's a reasonable explanation. But the Isha Yefas Torah. So I think the idea that I take away from this, the Rambam and the Ramban have a great debate on it and how it's supposed to work and how you're supposed to control your urges. I look at it as the tension between external beauty and moral discipline, and how it's kind of giving a way for an imperfect human to deal with the tension between an external beauty and a more baser part of their which, especially during times of the fog of war, they call it. We know we have various inquiries that go on after every war about things that might have happened during the war. During the fog of war, the basic instinct to do certain things.
Yeah.
And then kind of a moral discipline that comes into these imperfect human beings. We have to say, no, pause, wait, delay, and give it some time to reflect. Is this really what you want to be doing? Yeah. And if it is, the person who is on the other side of this relationship also needs time to digest this process and consider this process. So there is kind of, for me, a tension between external beauty, the baser instincts of a human being on the one hand, and on the other hand, kind of a higher self that we can allow ourselves to get to. And the way we can allow ourselves to get to is via delaying. So there's negative characteristics that have positive characteristics on the other side. And so the negative characteristic is procrastination. We all do that a fair bit, but I do, yeah. The opposite of procrastination is the power to stop when you've got momentum towards doing something wrong, or when there's momentum in a negative experience for the community or for yourself personally. The power to just stop there and say, hang on a second, let's all take a deep breath. Let's take a step back. Is this really the path that we want to be going down? Is this the thing that we want to be doing? So this idea of a delay, I think it's a 4-week delay in the Parsha. I think it's a 4-week delay. The idea is the power of a delay when you're going downhill to perhaps a debased activity, inappropriate activity, is extremely powerful. It just allows you to think for a moment and say, is this the right thing to do? When I was in Duntroon doing military training, they said, most battles, you don't need to wipe out your enemy. You just need to delay them long enough that they lose their momentum and break up their schedule. So one of the defensive maneuvers they taught us was the delay. Just bog them down, and some of the greatest victories of wars and battles throughout history and military history have been through the process of delay, bogging the enemy tanks, bogging the enemy apparatus down. And so I think the power of delay here, of saying there's a baser instinct at play, let's put a pause on it, hold fire, just take a moment to consider, is this something? And when you take the passion and the momentum out of the wrong thing, suddenly you're able to make a much clearer decision and say, maybe I shouldn't be going down this track. That's my view. Is that okay?
You have the chance to be less impulsive about it.
Impulsive.
Yeah. So I like what you said.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. But
Yeah,
no, thank you. I agree with all that. I think it's also interesting to see from the Torah's perspective how Hashem doesn't just say, this is not allowed at all. That, if you see an enemy and you feel certain things, or you're leaning towards doing something, it's not just completely forbidden, because sometimes that's a bit impossible, especially like what David was saying, when someone is in that moment in a time of war. The Torah kind of understands what human nature might be like at that point. And so they're not just saying it's not allowed, but okay, fine, we will allow it as long as you adhere to a certain process and protocol, which, like David said, would help cool you down, allow you to think a bit more rationally, use your head and not just your heart. And yeah, just delaying it would help you make a clearer decision around it. And you can change your mind anytime of those 4 weeks. Anytime along that process, you might already feel a bit more deflated and then, give up on that impulse. But I think there's value in allowing something and not just saying no outright. And we were talking about chinuch earlier, about raising children, and that's also really important. It's so easy to just say no, that's not allowed. But then, being the recipient of a no is not that great. So if you can find a way to allow it somehow, or under certain conditions, or at a certain time, or saying this is not allowed for right now, but how about tomorrow we do this, or how about we do something else instead? Just redirecting is so much more powerful than just blanket no's. Even from a rabbinic perspective, when you ask a question from a rabbi, if they could, it's easy to just say, no, that's not kosher. No, that's not allowed. But instead, if they're willing to work with you and find a way where you could, where something could become permissible, even if it's a more difficult path or not the most straightforward, it's worth pursuing. I think everyone feels better about it.
I just said maybe you should talk to Daniel Andrews about that. I think it's a great lesson.
COVID reference. Oh no. We have to have a beer for every COVID reference. No.
No, but it's interesting you mentioned about the rabbi saying no, because you're right. You don't need smicha to say no. You can hire a computer and you could just train it to say no to every question, and then you'll be fine. But I heard another explanation on that commentary, which is very similar to what you said, but a slightly different angle, if you like. And that was, Kitayta Milchama is really talking about life. Life is a battle. There's a constant battle between making the right choices and the wrong choices. We have free choice, and the Torah was referring, obviously, as I said, there's many layers of Torah, and of course, what this can be learned in many different ways. But it was saying that as you come across in life, you're going to be confronted with many different things. And the question is, how do you know if this thing is good for you or not good for you? And you got to sometimes take it back to its primary source and look at it from an internal level and, strip it away, strip all the lights and the bells and the whistles and say, is this thing ultimately pure? And is there something which is truly going to help me and benefit me, as opposed to just, am I attracted to it because it's got an external appeal? And you'll find that things which are positive and things which are healthy for you, the more that you dig deep, you'll see, ultimately there is really powerful and good things. And there, it's good for you. But things which aren't, the minute you strip away the lights and the bells and whistles, if you like, you'll find they're empty and there's no real benefit for you. And so the Torah was giving us an instruction how to go about life. And of course, it requires that shmirah that you mentioned earlier, that ability to notice things and to be observant and to be, cognizant of the things that come across your path. Otherwise, things will just come and go, and you'll just be, you'll be like what they call a deer in headlights. You'll just be, or drawn after like the flies to light. Oh, what's the shiniest thing that I can choose now? Sometimes we are like that, we're after the shiniest gadgets that attract us. So important to do that.
What's the best gadget you bought during lockdown, Daniel? What's that? Or Rachel?
What did we buy? We didn't really buy any gadgets, did we? We bought a microphone. I think that was
Oh yeah.
That was our biggest purchase.
They gave at the beginning of the first lockdown, they gave at the second lockdown. I'm losing track of lockdown. They gave us
sorry, I did.
You did good.
They
You got a
gave us a
watch.
budget.
I got a Garmin watch.
Yeah.
And you know why I got a Garmin watch? Because everyone thinks I'm a runner, that I've got a Garmin watch. You know?
But he is.
I've started now. I started doing running.
He does a lot of exercise.
That's good.
I get forced by someone in the house. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, so I just steal his, and it looks like he runs more. Just kidding.
No, because in the beginning when I had the watch, I never ran, but people assume you got a Garmin watch, they think you're a runner. So people would like ask me, what's your quickest time? And I'm like, well, I don't run, like, why do you have the watch? So I said, it's a motivation. It's
make it the man. You'll get there. You're on the.
Oh, the only reason why I asked was because that concept of going beyond the glitzy exterior and also the idea of pausing and delaying and so it's a great trick that exists in many areas of life. For example, the classic example is an angry email. You write the angry email before you press send and go. Always a good idea to sleep on it and send it in the morning rather than just in case there's something in there and it's happened to all of us, at least multiple, a text message, a WhatsApp, or I just should have thought it the second time before saying that delay to consider. The considered pause that is one thing, but also with purchases online, especially during COVID, people are at home, so a lot of online shopping and people are doing a lot of I can say
your microphone. I don't know, from here it looks like your microphone is like it's hard to actually tell what it is. It looks like it looks like a kettle and does it make tea as well? I don't know what it does.
Look at this.
It was hard to work out what it was from.
Hang on,
that looks very professional. You see, we have
I'm a disc jockey.
One. Yeah. Your one looks much more professional.
Very seriously. We go all out. But there are, I kid you not, there are deliveries coming to this house every day for Shimmy, my son. He's so used to, me just buying things for him online. So every day he's like, okay, what can we get? Let's look on your computer. And he just gives me his wish list and then waits at the door, when's my scooter coming? And he gets presents, but I gotta teach him to just slow it down a little bit. And yes, things are coming your way and good things are coming your way, but just give it a little pause.
He's ordering them himself online as well. You
got to disable the credit card. That's it.
So another area which I think, which we can definitely talk about, and I think, we don't want to dwell on what's happened over the past week necessarily, but in the Parsha, obviously in the beginning, it speaks about if you have if you build a roof.
If you build a roof, you need to make sure that you put a fence around it. Which is
if you build a house and you've got a roof space, you've got to put the fence around it. And I think
if you build a new house and you have a roof, you have to build a fence around it. Exactly.
Yeah. And why and I think obviously, somebody would say, why does the Torah need to tell us to build a fence? Surely that would be, obvious, perhaps. But I think the Torah is really alluding to not just the house particular example. I think it's our responsibility to people generally. Yeah. You were saying about what we say, even we need to put a fence around it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think if we look at that whole concept of our responsibility to our fellow human beings, perhaps we can understand, that at times when people don't do the right thing and they don't consider the safety and the well-being of other people, and it's just about me,
and sort of think twice. And also what you were saying before about thinking before you post things, I think that's also very important, which is similar to this, making sure you think twice and, give it a minute or at least 5 minutes before you actually put a post, because that post can never come down. That's it. You could really hurt someone badly. So I think it's the same idea with the fence, that the fence is there to give you a few seconds or give you some
measures.
Yeah, exactly.
So you think it's for yourself too. It's the fence is protecting you as well.
Yeah, 100%. And especially now with social media, it's just you post, that's it. It's done. So you definitely have to think twice. And I think that's what it's there. It's for you. It's for someone else. It's for, Yeah, but
I think it's exactly. And I think, we really got to be cognizant of how our actions can actually harm another person. And we can't just claim it's not my problem. It's not my fault. I didn't know.
Yeah.
The Torah is telling us you got to build those guardrails. And I like the interpretation you've said, that it's also that you don't possibly, have get hurt yourself too. In you might walk off your own roof, God forbid,
Yeah, and the metaphor could also be, I think that's the Shalom HaKodesh, Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, who says that the Kisivne Bayis Chadash, when you build a new house, is a reference to perhaps you going up a level in your career or in your prestige. You take on a new position. Perhaps I'm not talking about you, Daniel. I know you're.
Thanks.
But you take on a new role. Okay, now this is going to sound like I'm preaching to you. I'm giving you a rebuke.
Please preach away.
Okay, so you take on a new role. The risk is it gets to your head.
And the Caulfield Shul, you just don't speak. Don't get specific. But when
No.
There's a fence.
I've got another one there. Anyways, I've got another thought that relates. Anyways, the risk is that it gets to your head, and hubris and arrogance come into it. I'm the big rabbi. I've been the president of the Rabbinical Council now. Anyways, so suddenly, the leading Orthodox shul in Melbourne. So anyways, so the risk, that's the risk. So all you need to do is create boundaries around, realizing that perhaps, and one of the best boundaries that we have in the field of being a rabbi is the Rebbitzin and your congregation and a good president. I've got my president and his wife there. Just can tell you, wind it up if you're getting a little bit carried away with yourself. Bring it down a peg or two. So the idea of making a fence, which is to protect from the damage that comes as a result of hubris, is one that is read into this week's into that verse. Kisivna Bayis Chadash, you take on a new edifice, and you're way up there on the roof, beautiful sprawling vistas of all the small people down below. You realize that you should create some barriers and boundaries around yourself. So that's the Shalom HaKodesh mentions.
It's a really powerful, beautiful vote. Thank you.
No worries. Good luck.
Not that. Can we look, Roth? It looked like you were going to say something. I don't know if
I think she's keeping.
I always look like I'm always about to.
She's putting the boundary. I'm joking.
I was just thinking that, anything we have in Torah, like anything we have in our lives, even something as simple, or maybe even though it's a very special thing to buy a house, it's a pretty everyday thing. It's not a spiritual thing if you go and buy a house, or then the next part after the house talks about having a vineyard and the rules associated with that, or having a field. Anything we do in life, there's always a set of rules that govern it. And I especially appreciate it when those rules include thinking about others, thinking about the safety of other people. So your own house, make sure it's a safe place for people. Yeah. Or, the rules about having a field and what we leave for the poor people. Like, it's not just about us, but inbuilt in our rules, we are always thinking about others. So hopefully that does keep us grounded, and that does keep us humble and just better people for it, instead of getting carried away with ourselves. Wow, look at me, look at everything I've accumulated. But let me stop and think, how can that impact others in a positive and safe way?
100%. I wanted, I don't know if there was a particular section. I remember I mentioned I wanted to go back very quickly to the lost object, returning a lost object. I was listening to a beautiful shir today, which was, it says in the pasuk that if you find a shor or a chamor or a simla and a seh, whether you find your brother's ox or donkey or their clothing or a sheep, whatever, and then it says in everything that your brother might have lost. And a lot of the people ask, why does it have to mention all those particular items that you could lose? And I heard a beautiful shir today, and I'll try to say it very quickly. I don't want to hog the whole time, but just it says that each of these four things are really, it's speaking spiritually, as I mentioned before, emotionally, psychologically. And sometimes we can get lost in one of these behaviors. So it's not just those particular items that get lost. We can demonstrate a particular negative behavior, which in a sense shows that we're lost. So for example, a shor represents when you lose yourself in that you're aggressive. So an ox generally is not. I mean, you look at the ox, you drive on holiday, you go to the country in Victoria, and you see all the cows and the oxen, and they look very calm, but get on the ox's bad side, not a fun experience. So I'm not looking at you for any reason.
Thanks.
But
is that metaphor?
But
Let's not talk
and
about
so
that.
and so a person might lose themselves in the character of an ox. They might become aggressive, and we need to return. We need to help that person return, or they might have the concept of a donkey. A donkey is very, very stubborn, digs the heels in, very cold, very lifeless. There's no response. Sometimes you prefer an ox because at least there's energy. Sometimes the person becomes, as I said, just has that apathetic approach. It's also very nasty. And then clothing, you mentioned, it's interesting. I don't know, somebody mentioned clothing, but clothing in Hebrew is beged. Beged means a boged. You're sort of a traitor, because clothing is can be very misleading. You can have a poor person dressed up in a fancy suit, and then you think they're rich, or vice versa. Or vice versa, And so clothing represents where a person's not true to themselves. They're dishonest. They pretend to be one person on the outside, and internally they're something different. Again, that's another aspect of losing yourself. And finally, a sheep, like the word is, this person just follows everybody, follows this person, that, and they have no conviction. And the Torah was telling us that these are the 4 ways that you can lose yourself. And we've got to make sure that we help ourselves and others. If you see someone going through those, we need to help return them and restore them from that particular behavior. So if you feel lost in any of those ways, if you feel that you're aggressive, or perhaps that you're apathetic, or that you're not honest with yourself or others, or you just follow the crowd, it's time to look at, how do I improve, and how do I return myself, and how do and if you know someone who needs that help, to help them be returned too.
Amazing.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Profound.
Thank you for coming
That's
today.
good.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's very good. So today,
No, I'm just thinking it's a good time now also for self-reflection, being in the month of Elul, when we're trying to look back at our year and trying to make good resolutions for the coming year. It's good to take a good look at ourselves and see what are the areas that could use some improvement, or some finding ourselves and redirecting. Thank you.
Yes, we need to all change. The minute you believe that you don't need to change, then you need the most change.
But I think if you help other people, that also helps you too. Especially now, there's a lot of people that are in, unfortunately, quarantine all around Coalfield area. So I know I'm just sort of giving a shout out, but there's a lot of people actually, might need someone to come there and just drop up a package, or hopefully buy dinner, or just doing some shopping, which I actually just had a friend who called me. She's like, oh, I did click and collect, but they, half the things weren't there. And she was like, just so upset and didn't know what to do. I was like, don't worry. I'll go pick it up and I'll drop it up your house. She's like, are you sure? And I'm like, no, it's fine. So I'm just saying, it's a very hard time. A lot of people are, feeling a bit down and stressed out, and especially it's before Rosh Hashanah. So I think, if you also want to feel good about yourself, I think it's really important to help other people, because when you help other people, you actually help yourself. So I think that's really important. Yeah.
So they say one of the mental health, tips is, if you show kindness, it's actually very helpful for your own mental well-being.
Yeah.
To reach out and assist someone else.
Yeah.
David, have you had an update on what, we spoke about it last time? I think we spoke together, or you gave out some really interesting gifts. So it was before, when was it before? Shavuot, maybe?
Oh yeah. In our care packages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you get any interesting?
Well, that's up to Danny. It's Danny, the shul. One of the benefits of having a shul president that's an importer or exporter or whatever it is,
And generous person.
and generous person, and a handler. And a handler,
couple,
good at a good
Well,
mitzvah.
can I second that? Because when we spent Shabbos in East Melbourne, it was the one Shabbos that it was pouring rain. David said, it never rains when he walks home from Shabbos, except when I came. So I told him, Hashem was telling him, was saying, don't leave Caulfield Shul and try to take over East Melbourne. I said, Hashem was giving you protection, that I would not, try and take over your space. But in any event, it was pouring rain, and I silly me who's been in Melbourne for 12 years, should have known to bring a jacket, and I didn't. And Danny, the president, he saves the day. He pulled out. Everyone. He was like a magician. He was just pulling out jackets from everywhere.
Danny, unmute yourself and tell us about that.
Hold on. Let me let you unmute yourself.
Let Danny unmute him. So he's got a good story about the jackets.
Oh yeah. Oh no, with my great grandfather, because this is a beautiful story for me. So he apparently, I wasn't alive then, but as the story went, that he was a very rich man, and then he lost all his shares in the railroad when the Russian Revolution came along, and he still had a lot of clothing. So he used to go out and had about 3 or 4 jackets on, and then he'd come back with no jacket. And he doesn't matter whether he was rich or he was poor, it was no difference. He would take off his own jacket and give it to people who couldn't afford it or didn't have. So I thought that was a beautiful story and inspired me.
And your story and your actions inspired me that night to
wear multiple jackets.
Yeah. So from now on, whenever I go out, I have like 5 or 6 jackets, and I'm waiting for the day where there's going to be raining and I can just give them all away.
Very good. Very good.
Okay, so we're waiting to see which gifts East Melbourne. I know that our President Harold, who's on as well, is also a very generous, kind man. I think he's still on. He's looking also for an interesting gift that we can give the community before Yom Tov.
Yeah. So last year, Danny had a big shipment of goat milk soap. So that's what we gave it out before Shavuos.
That's pretty cool.
And we got, because it was milk, but then people weren't sure whether I was expecting them to ingest it or was I indicating that perhaps they lacked in hygiene or something. So it became a controversial gift. We actually didn't give them all out, and I've still got about 3 dozen goat soap boxes downstairs here.
Oh, thank you, because that's why. Oh, okay, now I know it wasn't so kind of you when I got a birthday present. No, I'm kidding.
It's like you can have 2. Have 2. So, anyways, let's learn. We came to learn. What else can we learn?
Yeah. So I mean, there's another idea. I mean, which was possibly worth talking about, and that is the different nations that weren't allowed to sort of engage in the Jewish people. And one of them was Ammon, who didn't, show kindness and compassion and reach out to the Jewish people when they were really, down and out. And they needed just simple supplies like bread and water, and they turned a blind eye. They just didn't show any care and concern. And the Torah says that such a nation, such an attitude, such a position is not what we as Jews need to be like. And I think, we don't know who Ammon is today, but we can't have that aspect of being an Ammoni in ourselves. I think sometimes it's difficult though to work out how we can help. We mentioned, helping. You said something very powerful, to help people we know, let's say, who are in quarantine. But when you think about situations like what's happening in Afghanistan right now, it's very hard to say, like, how do we show compassion? How do we show care? How do we demonstrate that it's not just, we turn the news channel on and we turn the news channel off, and it's like, oh.
Well, Rachel said she stops over time and helps dogs and cats and people. Rachel, what are we going to do? How are we going to help the people?
Well, Rachel, I think David, did you book a flight through your army connections for her to Afghanistan to go and meet with the Taliban?
I think she's going to go to Canada first.
I'm going to make a stop over
Montreal.
But funnily enough, speaking about that, the other experience that I had at East Melbourne, which I said I would say it in my drasha the next week, which I did, was that one of your congregants saved a bird, or tried to save a bird on and we have the story in this week's Parsha about the mother bird. Remember the Kiddush, one of your congregants mentioned that they did CPR on the bird before they came into shul. Did you hear that? Were you?
I didn't know. I wouldn't even know how to do CPR.
No, you did. No, what a bird. One of your congregants, I can't remember who.
Oh, right.
I don't know if Danny heard that story. They mentioned that the Kiddush, that they were late to shul because as they were walking through the streets of East Melbourne, they saw a bird on the floor and it was needing CPR, and they gave it. And I wouldn't know how to do it. I don't know if I would, but Rachel, maybe you said you stop and you help things on the side.
Yeah, I don't know if I would do CPR.
I think she's got that extreme, Dan.
No, but honestly, getting back to the point, I think it's so important that we as human beings, as Jews, we have to have compassion, we have to have consideration, and not just turn, not only turn a blind eye. I mean, look, as I said, it's not. I remember years ago, it was one of my first times flying overseas. I remember they used to walk around with those little things on the plane, give change for Africa, your leftover change from your currency.
Yeah.
And I remember like one time they were coming through and I had a bit of money. I was thinking, should I buy, like, I really felt like a Coca-Cola. I didn't have much money. I was like, oh, Coca-Cola. And then they came past and they're like, can you give of your leftover change? And it really like struck me in my own thinking that, here I am, I've got an opportunity to help someone else, and I'm considering whether I should use the money to buy Coca-Cola, and that's not a nice attitude, And I think, yes, such a small amount of change, and what good could it really do? But we have these small little chances to help. Maybe even just talking about it tonight is a sign of respect to people who are going through difficult times, and to see some of the things happening there, it's just quite shocking, to be honest.
Terrible. So what you were saying earlier about the way the Torah gives us rules about how to treat other nations based on our history with them. And then there's also rules based on our own history. How many times does the Torah tell us, Zachar, remember that you're a stranger in the land of Egypt? And so there's actually rules of how we deal with, or how we dealt back then with Egyptians, sometimes in a positive way, just remembering the fact that we were a stranger in a foreign land. And yes, we were enslaved, but there was a degree of hospitality at the beginning, at least. And that's recognized. And we do have long memories. And when there is someone that does good to us, we remember that. When we were in an uncomfortable situation, we remember that. We keep that with us. And that should translate into how we treat others. We know what it feels like to be on the other side, to be a stranger, to be persecuted. And so that should really color how we deal with other people who are going through rough situations as well. We can't afford to turn a blind eye. How would that, especially considering our history, we really need to make sure that we constantly remember and extend a hand to those who would need it.
Do you think that your own experiences, and I'm sure the answer is obvious, but the question is, I guess, more rhetorical in a way. But when you've been through a particular experience, it definitely gives you obviously a different angle and a much more empathy. And that's why, as a nation, we have to be very generous and kind to those who wish to convert. I've spoken about it, I think, the last year or a few shurim ago. I know in East Melbourne, there's lots of people who come through your congregation who are not Jewish, and many who want to convert. And I think it's a very warm and welcoming place. We have people who've done the course here. And I think, we have to remember that we were also strangers. And when you're a stranger, when you're not well known, and you don't know the community, you don't know the inner workings, you don't know who the machas, who the schmoozers, how you get around. We have to make do. Even as a frum Jew, it's funny. I was in Israel on a birthright mission once, and we were staying in a hotel. It was actually the one year that Jerusalem was filled with snow. The hotels were all. And
we went together.
We went together, and there was no minyan in the hotel, so I ventured out to go find a minyan. I found this little shtibel, which was like this ultra religious. I don't know what type of chasim they were, to be honest. And they offered me to do Hagba and Glila, which is lifting and tying the Torah. And I was so nervous because I didn't know which minhag they were doing, which custom, and if I was going to do it wrong or right, they would shout at me. And so I asked the guy, before I said, how do we do Hagba and Glila? He said, relax. And he was very, very nice and warm, but I even felt sort of out of place. They all had different types of garments. And I remember thinking, this is probably how many of the congregants or visitors come to my shul feel. They don't know what's going on. They feel totally lost. And that one person coming over to me and saying, relax, they're beseder, al tidag, you're beseder, and I said, I understand what's going on. And I ended up doing Hagba Glila. I don't know if I did it right according to the minhag of the shul, but nobody stoned me or threw me out. And I lived to tell the tale.
Really sure.
So I think what you said is so right. We've got to remember what it feels like, and then you can then, I guess, have more understanding when you see someone else going through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I see from Basil Kravitz that he asked about charging interest, neshech and ribis, and the idea at the core of not charging interest is that the Torah doesn't condone and isn't teaching about earning parnasa and earning geld from somebody else's money or from somebody else's situation where you're not working for that money. The Torah, and you can see it in a number of mitzvahs in this week's parasha, encourages the transactive approach where you work. Hazorim bedima, you work, you put in toil and you put in effort, and then you get a payment, you get a reward. And if you're doing that, then the Torah actually really protects the rights of the worker way more than anyone would have imagined in those days. I mean, some of the laws in this week's parasha would make the workers' unions around the world ecstatic, the way that they preserve and protect the worker. But the idea is that you should labor and then you should profit, rather than just profiting from something where you're not laboring. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have an investment because you've worked for that and so on, but the idea of profiting from somebody else's misfortune or situation where they need to borrow money from you. They need it quite desperately in certain instances, and profiting from such a passive thing as just loaning them and gifting them the money. The Torah is trying to encourage us much more to be somebody who's generous and says, well, it doesn't particularly disadvantage me. If it does, it might be a separate discussion. It doesn't particularly disadvantage me. I'll loan you the money and you can pay me back free of interest, which is a much better way for a society to function than to seek to somehow profit from somebody's need or desire for that money. Now, there is still a process called a heteriska, where if it is part of a financial transaction and a working like transaction, then you can profit in that circumstance, but it's a complicated discussion. But at least that's the theme behind it, which is a very important theme about sensitivity towards another person's plight and not seeking to profit from somebody else's difficulty or need.
Very interesting insight. I never really heard that insight. It's a good explanation about Rabins.
I planted Basil to ask the question. Anything else? Any final reportages or thoughts?
I might say one. I might just, based on that whole thought of remembering our past, we don't just sit and wallow in the past, but we use it to impact how we act in the present, for sure. And Judaism as a whole is also always looking forward. What more can I do to grow myself to be a better person, to refine my own little area of the world, to make this place better, for my children, to transmit the values I have to the next generation. So as much as we tell ourselves all the time, Zachor, and remember, and, go to Shul for Yizkar, we're always taking the past with us. We don't just leave it at that, but we want to propel it forward and take it into the future.
Beautiful. And I think if we can just take a lesson from the actual words of the Parsha, which is Kitaytze when you go out, and may it be when you go out of lockdown. May this Parsha
be hope. We can live with hope, like what you started off with.
Exactly.
How important it is to have hope in our lives.
Yeah, don't ever lose hope, and we're here to help you keep the hope alive.
And we're all here for you. There's four of us, so
Danny's got something. Danny's got a special treat.
Danny.
Okay,
Daniel, it's question time.
Is it a question or is it?
Okay, so we're gonna end the live stream, and then we're gonna unmute everyone, and you can all
go crazy.
Have your piece if you want to unmute yourselves. So thank you everybody who's watched on social media. We look forward to doing this again at some point. David and I will conspire again and collaborate much better. And thank you, and have a beautiful night, and Shabbat Shalom.
Now,